Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Aatif Rashid's Book Club. I'm Aatif Rashid, and today we're going to be doing another poetry episode and looking at Robert Browning's Love Among the Ruins from 1855. So, this is a very evocative title, obviously, Love Among the Ruins, a very famous title. There is an Edward Burne-Jones painting from 1873, a famous Pre-Raphaelite painting called Love Among the Ruins. Evelyn Waugh wrote a novel in 1953 titled Love Among the Ruins. There's even a Mad Men episode, I believe from the third season, titled Love Among the Ruins. So, in many ways, I think the title of Browning's poem, because it's such an evocative title, such a wonderful title, the kind of title you wish you'd thought of for your own work. Because it's such an evocative title, I think people have an idea maybe of this poem or feel as though they've heard of this poem. In truth, though, I think the poem itself sometimes doesn't get read as much as the title. So Robert Browning was a Victorian poet. He's a very interesting poet. He's one of my favorite poets. A lot of his poems are about history, such as this one, or he often takes historical figures and essentially writes a dramatic monologue from these historical figures' point of view. We're going to look at some of those in the future as well. The most famous of those is, of course, My Last Duchess, which sounds very romantic, but is actually a very terrifying and dark poem. Love Among the Ruins, however, is very romantic. And we're going to look at why and how and in what way today as we dive into it. It's also a poem that's not that long. So the last poem we looked at, The Eve of St. Agnes, that was very long compared to this one. This one is only 7 stanzas, and each stanza has 12 lines. So we're essentially going to be able to read the whole poem today as we discuss it, and really dive into a close reading here. The most obvious thing about the poem when we take a look at it is, of course, the rhythm. It has a slightly unconventional rhythm to it, where it alternates long and short lines. So we have long lines that I believe are hexameter, right? Trochaic hexameter. And the shorter lines have just 2 syllables. And so this creates a really interesting, really beautiful rhythmic effect as we read the poem, going back and forth between these long and short lines, long and short, long and short. It creates a wave-like motion to the poem, to the sound of the poem, to the feeling of the poem, an ebb and flow. And more particularly, the short lines still rhyme with the previous line, so they are still couplets. But the short line almost acts as a kind of accent on the sound of the long line, the final sound of the long line. We'll see what we mean when we read a few examples, but I think rhythmically it's a very inventive and evocative poem. And the effect is, I think, quite lyrical and magical. It puts you in a kind of calm, dreamlike state. And this matches, I think, the context of the poem. The poem is set in the ruins of an ancient city. Unspecified, what culture, what time period, that's not the point. You can imagine whatever culture you want. The Romans, the Greeks, whoever you'd like. The idea is, in the context, in the sort of ruins of this old civilization, you have 2 lovers meeting. A love story, a love among the ruins. And so the ebb and flow of this long and short line, I think you can sort of see the contrast almost that's being drawn between the glorious militaristic past and the beautiful, calm, sensual, lyrical present. We're going to look at some examples, but let's read the first stanza and let's listen to the rhythms. Where the quiet-colored end of evening smiles, miles and miles, on the solitary pastures where our sheep, half asleep, tinkle homeward through the twilight, stray or stop as they crop. Was the sight once of a city great and gay, so they say, of our country's very capital, its prince, ages since, held his court in, gathered councils, wielding far peace or war. So we have that ebb and flow rhythm, right? And the rhyme scheme really accents it. Where the quiet colored end of evening smiles miles and miles, right? The short line, miles and miles, underscores the end of the long line, the word smiles. And that effect, that musicality carries through the whole poem, the way it rhymes. And so to me, I think the long and short, it almost lulls you a little bit. It's almost, I said dreamlike earlier, somnolent might be another way to put it, but not in a bad way. When I say it puts you to sleep, I don't mean that in a negative way. I almost mean that it's like a lullaby. It lulls you with its gentle rhythms, right? It's like a rocking motion, back and forth, back and forth. If this poem at its core thematically is about time, history, and the contrast between the past and the present, and the idea of eternity, in a way, I really find this rocking rhythm, this back and forth, this ebb and flow, to be a way of conveying eternity, almost. It's as if through the rhythms, Browning has captured the essence of time somehow. It's not an easy concept to grasp, because I think a lot of it lies in the feeling and the sound, the way your body reacts to the sounds of the poem. But we're going to see more of that as we keep reading. Let's look at the images that we see in this first stanza. So we have sheep, right, that are half asleep, tinkling homeward through the twilight. So we have twilight, we have sheep kind of moving off, and we see this image of the ruins of a city, right? A city great and gay, where the prince held his court long ago. But what kind of image are we creating? We're creating this pastoral, idyllic atmosphere of the ruins of this city. I often think when I read this poem of one of the paintings of Claude Lorrain or Hubert Robert, the great French painter of ruins from the 18th century. Claude Lorrain, I think, simply because of the pastoral imagery, right? As a painter, he's so associated with that. Hubert Robert, of course, is known for his paintings of ruins. It's almost like Browning must have seen one of those paintings from the 18th and the 17th century and is thinking of those paintings as he's creating this image for us of the sheep going homeward. And so the first contrast we get in the poem is the sheep against the ruins. And once again, Browning is sort of suggesting, once there was this great palace, now there are simply sheep, right? Which of these has survived? Not the prince, not his councils, not his court, just the sheep tinkling homeward. That's the symbol of eternity Browning wants us to understand. And it's an interesting, it's a very moving image, right? The idea that when all the tumult of politics goes away, what will be left? Sheep tinkling homeward through the twilight. It puts things in perspective, I think. So let's read the next stanza. Now the country does not even boast a tree, as you see, to distinguish slopes of verdure, certain rills from the hills, intersect and give a name to, else they run into one, where the domed and daring palace shot its spires up like fires, or the 100-gated circuit of a wall, bounding all, made of marble, men might march on, nor be pressed 12 abreast. So the other thing Browning does with the structure of this poem is a lot of the stanzas themselves are divided in half, kind of the top part and the bottom part. So the top part, the first few lines of every stanza, that gives us an image of what the ruins are like today, right? Now the country does not even boast a tree, as you see. So we have just a grassy plain, treeless, right? Just hills and rills, just this field of grass. And then the second half of the stanza starts describing what the city used to look like. Domed and daring palace, shot its spires up like fires. So Browning uses a lot of really intense verbs and images that convey a sense of activity, of bustling movement whenever he describes the city, right? The verb he uses there is shot. The domed and daring palace shot its spires up like fires, right? The gate of the wall is described as 100-gated circuit of a wall. Men might march on, nor be pressed 12 abreast. He's emphasizing the monumental scale and size of this city. Spires up like fires. And yet, of course, what is it like today? It's ruins. It's gone, right? It's the sheep tinkling homeward. So there's an irony in the way he describes this city. So glorious and so magnificent and such an active city, full of movement, the spires shooting upwards like fires. But fire, of course, is an interesting image. Fire is intense and smoldering and passionate, but it dies away. Later, we are going to see his image of love, which, in a way, is a kind of fire, of course. But he's almost suggesting that that kind of love, that kind of passion, that kind of fire will last longer than the fire of this old civilization that has broken down, right? Browning is saying essentially that even the most intense, the most fiery, passionate civilizations from the past, they disappear. Those fires don't last. They die away. They become, what was it at the beginning of this stanza? A country without a tree. Just a stretch of hilly grass without even a tree. So let's read the next stanza. And such plenty and perfection, see, of grass never was. Such a carpet as, this summertime, o'erspreads and embeds every vestige of the city, guest alone, stock or stone, where a multitude of men breathed joy and woe long ago. Lust of glory pricked their hearts up, dread of shame struck them tame, and that glory and that shame alike the gold bought and sold. Once again, same pattern to the stanza. First half, description of the grassy plain where the ruins of the city now lie. And the second half, the description of the city. So the grassy plain, what is emphasized about it? The plenty and perfection. So I think that word plenty is really key because it's going to contrast with the image of the gold at the end. Right, when we think of a civilization at its peak, its golden age, we often use a word like plenty or prosperity. We have this idea that these civilizations at their height, they provide everything, right? They are sources of plenty for their people. They're wealthy, they're rich. But what is he saying here? It's not the civilization that provides plenty, it's the grass. It's today, amidst the ruins of the civilization, amidst the ruins of the city, that we have plenty. Such plenty and perfection, see, of grass never was. Such a carpet as this summertime o'erspreads. So today, this carpet of grass is the source of plenty and perfection. The city, by contrast, let's jump to the second half. What does he say about the city? He emphasizes that the men of the city feel a sense of lust. Lust, though, not for sex, but lust of glory. Later, we're going to see another image of lust, of love, right, when we see the lovers in the ruins. But that's going to be, to Browning, that's going to be the ideal form of love. That's true love and true desire, not this lust of glory that these people from the past felt. And the emphasis there is that the gold is buying this lust of glory, this dread of shame. So gold is going to be a very specific image that we're going to see continue in this poem. He associates the city with gold. And the thing he's going to say about gold is that it doesn't last. It doesn't prevent this city, as we're going to see, from turning into a ruin. In other words, it doesn't matter how much gold this ancient civilization had. In the end, almost inevitably, it's going to become this ruin, right? Time and history will do its work, no matter how glorious or wealthy this kind of city was. Right? Again, that contrast between the plenty at the beginning and the gold at the end. That's the key image of this stanza. So continuing on, let's look at the next one. So, now the single little turret that remains on the plains, by the caper overrooted, by the gourd overscored, while the patching house leek's head of blossom winks through the chinks, marks the basement whence a tower in ancient time sprang sublime, and a burning ring all round the chariots traced as they raced, and the monarch and his minions and his dames viewed the games. So again, we have the same pattern in the stanza. The first half describing the ruins, and in this case emphasizing the flowers, right? The plants that are growing, the gourd, the house leek's head of blossom, visible through the chinks. And this is all contrasted with the chariot races that must have gone on here in ancient times, the burning ring, the chariots as they raced, the monarch and his minions viewing the games. Again, the contrast between the language used to describe the flowers in the present versus the language used to describe the glory of the civilization in the past. Just like that earlier stanza where he described the spires shooting up like fires, here we have a similar image associated with fire, a burning ring all round, the chariots traced as they raced. But again, what's the emphasis here? Think of the contrast in images. We have this great burning ring as the chariots race, juxtaposed against blossoms. A head of blossoms winking through the little stone. One is an image of racing, fire, movement, energy. The other is an image of stillness, of patience. These are two different images of time. So on the one hand, we have the chariots racing. They're going fast. They're burning the ring. And on the other hand, we have the flowers growing. One, the speed of chariots. Two, the speed of flowers growing. And which one does Browning say lasts? It's not the chariots, it's not the fire. It's the slowly growing blossoms. That's the future. And it's a very profound juxtaposition, a profound contrast in the images between the roaring fire of this past civilization, which kind of burns itself out almost, and the stillness and silence of the ruins. Continuing this series of contrasts, right? That's what he's doing with each of these stanzas, continuing the same contrast. So then let's look at the next stanza. So far we've read 4 stanzas, right? Remember, there are 7 total. So we're past halfway now. So we have 3 stanzas left. And structurally, this is when we're going to get into the lovers themselves. So we have not yet met the lovers in the present. And I know, while thus the quiet-colored eve smiles to leave to their folding all our many tinkling fleece in such peace, and the slopes and rills in undistinguished gray melt away, that a girl with eager eyes and yellow hair waits me there, in the turret whence the charioteers caught soul for the goal, when the king looked where she looks now, breathless, dumb, till I come. So here now the pattern has shifted. The pattern that he established of first half description of the ruins, second half description of the civilization. Now we get a shift in that as we introduce our narrator, who is coming to the ruins to meet the girl that he's in love with. And you'll notice in the second half, after the dash, in the previous stanzas, right after the dash, we get descriptions of the city. Here, we get a description of the girl. That a girl with eager eyes and yellow hair waits me there. She waits for him in the turret where the charioteers once raced, the same turret that we described in the previous stanza. So what is he doing here? I think he's contrasting their love story, right? This nameless narrator and this nameless girl, the love story in this ruin. He's contrasting or comparing it. He's juxtaposing it against the chariots, the racing, the past civilization. And he uses the phrase, all our many tinkling fleece. I think that suggests that they are shepherds, that they are the ones who own this flock of sheep. And they are coming here into these ruins to meet. A kind of pastoral ideal of a love story set against the backdrop of these ancient ruins. I mean, it's very romantic. And the romantic poets of the past might have handled it in a particular way, emphasizing the natural world, the emotions, the love bubbling up inside them. Think of how John Keats might have written this love story. But this is where Browning's identity as a Victorian poet really comes in. I mean, it is a love story, and it is quite moving. It is quite romantic. But Browning is really not that interested in the narrator, the girl, their emotions. He's interested in the ruins. He's interested in the contrast between the past and the present. He's interested in time and history. And this is what makes him different from a traditional romantic poet. This is why I believe he's clearly a Victorian poet. The Victorians were conscious of the idea of dying and decaying empires, right? They loved ruins. John Ruskin famously wrote about the ruins of Venice, the stones of Venice. I think because for many Victorians, Britain was at its height, imperially speaking. They lived in a country that was the great empire of its time, the Rome of its time. And like good artists, they were reflecting on, well, what comes next? What comes after an empire fades? What comes when this entire civilization falls to ruin? And that was what Browning was interested in here. And so when we come back to these characters, in a sense, they're not really characters in the same way that the lovers in the previous poem we analyzed were, Porphyro and Madeline. They don't even get names here. They are symbols. They're shepherds. They're symbols of a pastoral ideal, of this idea that after civilization collapses, after the empire falls, what is left? Well, doesn't go away. Time will still move. Time will still move. The flowers will still grow. The grass will grow. And in the ruins, you will have love. You will still have passion. Only it won't be the passion of the charioteers racing or the passion of the king looking on. It will be the passion of two people falling in love amidst the ruins. And so I think the other important color here is, of course, her yellow hair. It's kind of the only distinguishing feature we have, a girl with eager eyes and yellow hair. Earlier, we talked about the gold, right? Gold was an important color associated with the civilization in its heyday, with the past. That gold is gone. And I think the girl's yellow hair is meant to be the present version of that gold. An image that's meant to be a comparison to that gold. The gold has gone, the civilization has gone, but we have a girl with yellow hair who for this narrator is gold, right? For this narrator, she is the gold, and he is here to find her and see her. And so it's an image of pastoral love, of love among the ruins, as the title suggests, in which it's not about material wealth, it's not about gold. It's about something as simple as yellow hair, the beauty of yellow hair, the beauty of eager eyes. If we keep reading. But he looked upon the city, every side. Now the he here, remember, is the king, because that's how the last stanza ended, with the king. But he looked upon the city, every side, far and wide. All the mountains topped with temples, all the glades, colonnades, all the causeys, bridges, aqueducts, and then all the men. When I do come, she will speak not. She will stand, either hand on my shoulder, give her eyes the first embrace of my face, ere we rush, ere we extinguish sight and speech, each on each. So now the structure of the stanza is different. It's no longer description of the ruins followed by description of the civilization. Instead, what is the contrast here? We have the first half, a description of the king and what he sees, and the second half, a description of her looking at our narrator. Remember, in the previous stanza, she is standing in the turret, waiting for our narrator, waiting for her lover. And there's an explicit connection drawn between her and the king of this past civilization, right? She is standing where the king used to stand as he looked at the chariot races. And now in this stanza, we get a much more explicit connection between her and the king. So he, the king, is looking upon the city every side, far and wide. He's looking at the mountains, he's looking at the colonnades, at the causeys, bridges, aqueducts, all these features of his civilization, and all the men. Meanwhile, what is she looking at? She is standing with her hands on our narrator's shoulders, and she is looking into his face. Give her eyes the first embrace of my face. So, what is the connection Browning is drawing? He is suggesting that for two people, love is as important as an entire civilization was for this king. I mean, this is quite a dramatic image of what love feels like. I think it's quite moving. He's saying that when you're in love, you are like a king looking upon your civilization, looking upon your city in all its glory. That's what she's feeling, looking at our narrator. She is like a king as she looks upon the face of the person she's in love with. And it's sort of like Browning is saying, well, okay, this civilization may have fallen into ruin. The king is long dead, and all the things that are mentioned here, temples, colonnades, causeys, bridges, aqueducts, all of them have fallen into ruin. So what remains? Well, what remains is love. And Browning is saying that love is as important as, if not more important than, all those things that the king was looking upon. Think of, again, that image of the flower growing in the ruins, which is such a key image of this poem. I mean, that is love, right? Blossoming amongst the ruins. Browning is saying, even though history can be cruel to a civilization like this, even though history can bring down empires, love will blossom. Love will survive and thrive in the ruins. History cannot bring down love. The shepherds falling in love, they are eternal in a way that the civilization is not. That's the contrast that he's drawing here. And then let's look at the final stanza now, the end of the poem, which has one of my favorite lines in all of English literature, in all of English poetry. In 1 year they sent 1,000,000 fighters forth, south and north. And they built their gods a brazen pillar high as the sky, yet reserved 1,000 chariots in full force. Gold, of course. O heart, O blood that freezes, blood that burns, earth's returns for whole centuries of folly, noise, and sin, shut them in, with their triumphs and their glories and the rest. love is best. All right, so let's talk about this glorious stanza. It begins, of course, with the civilization, the old civilization, sending forth 1,000,000 fighters. And I think it's telling that the final stanza Browning ends on is a stanza celebrating war. Or not so much celebrating war, but describing the old civilization indulging in the pastime of war. And the implicit suggestion is perhaps this is how the civilization ultimately collapsed. Right? They might have all of these chariots, they might have a brazen pillar high built to their gods, they might have 1,000,000 fighters, and 1,000,000 is a huge number. That is an immense number to use here. And of course they have gold. That's the key, right? We return to the image of gold. But what is Browning's point? All of this, the gold, the fighters, the chariots, the brazen pillar, is meaningless. And what does he say here in the most emotionally direct line of the poem? "O heart." So he addresses the heart. He says, "O heart." I love it because so far we have had this pretty distant narrator who is, he's in love with this girl. He's there to go meet her, but he's reflecting on what he sees, the ruins, the sheep, eternity, time, history, civilizational collapse, etc., with a kind of intellectual distance, right? Being able to draw these parallels, conclusions, right? Think about the old civilization. And I think it all builds to this release. The phrase, "O heart," is so emotionally direct, is so explosive. It releases all of the pent-up tension and energy. It's the key line of the poem. "O heart," the narrator is saying. Thinking about this old civilization, he says, "O heart," as in, what is it that matters? Is it the gold? Is it the 1,000,000 men? The fighters, the chariots? Is it the old grandeur of the civilization? No, it's not. It's the heart that matters. It's the blood that freezes and the blood that burns. Now, that's an intense image, the word burns, right? Because what have we so far mostly associated with images of fire? We've associated the old civilization with fire. The chariots burning as they race. The spires shooting up like fires. So burning has so far been associated with the past. And here he's bringing it to the present. He's saying, no, it's our blood that freezes and burns. It's our heart pumping that blood that freezes and burns. He's finally associating fire and burning with his heart, with his love implicitly for this girl. It's as if reflecting on the civilization and its implied collapse has made him realize that what really matters is the blood and is the heart, is the blood, is his love and passion for this girl who he has come to the ruins to meet. And he concludes by saying, in the end, Earth's returns for whole centuries of folly, noise, and sin. Earth's returns is a key phrase because it implies this cyclicality, this idea that there is a cycle, right? An eternal cycle. In other words, he's suggesting that, yes, this civilization, right, it rose, it fell, but that this is just part of a cycle. Other civilizations will rise and fall. There will be centuries of folly, noise, and sin. He says, let all that go. Sin, I think, is an interesting word because we often associate sin with sexual sin. When we think of sin, we think sexual sin. But the sexual side of this poem is, of course, the narrator and his lover meeting in the ruins. But to Browning, that is not sin. That is beautiful. That is the beautiful passion of the heart and the blood that freezes and the blood that burns. That's beautiful. Sin is associated with everything the old civilization did. Remember earlier he used the word lust, but he used the word lust not to refer to sexual lust, but lust of glory. So for Browning, what is sin? It's not sex. It's the hubris of this old civilization. It's the gold. It's the fighters. It's building a brazen pillar high as the sky. And why is it sin? Because inevitably it will lead to ruin. Inevitably it will all collapse. And in the future, what will be left? Ruins, where shepherds will move with their tinkling flocks of sheep, and a space for lovers to meet at night. And what does he say? Shut them in with their triumphs and their glories and the rest. In other words, take all that civilization and just shut them in. In where? In the poem, perhaps? In these ruins? In is an interesting proposition. It leads us to wonder, where are we shutting everyone in? Well, whether it's the ruins, whether it's the poem, we're shutting them all in with their triumphs and their glories. And what remains? Love. Love is best. Now, you could argue, some people might argue that this last line is quite didactic, right? Telling us morally what to feel. Love is best. And, maybe a modernist poet would not have a line so direct like that, sure. But, maybe the Victorian poets were a little bit didactic. But I think it works here because it's not just an empty moral statement. It's a moral statement, it's an articulation of theme, an idea that follows images, characters, structure, development. This line works because we feel it. Before we even get to this line, we agree, yes, love is best. The heart is best. The blood that freezes and that burns is best. So, kind of reflecting on this more broadly, what has Browning achieved with this poem? And why is it so special? Well, like I said earlier, the Victorians, when we think of the Victorians, when we think of the 19th century, it's not that long ago. It's really not. I always think about it this way. This poem was written in 1855. My dad was born in 1955, so only 100 years later. This poem is only 100 years older than my father. More than that, think of the world of 1855. Britain at the height of its empire in the Victorian era. The sun never setting on the British Empire. Britain in control of India, in control of much of Asia, Africa, controlling the seas, the oceans. They're not even at the height of their empire yet. That's still to come, you could argue. 100 years later, in 1955, the British Empire is over. World War II has destroyed the British Empire. So Browning wrote this poem when the empire seemed like it was at its height, and he was talking about ruins. He was talking about the ruins of empire, and how amidst the ruins, what remains? Love, shepherds, flowers, nature. Maybe to an Englishman in the 1850s, reading this poem, the idea that the British Empire would ever have a certain ruined quality like the Romans, maybe it seemed far-fetched, far off. Nothing more than an imaginative hypothetical. Well, less than 100 years later, the empire did essentially fall. And today, in 2026, almost 175 years or so after Browning wrote this poem, there are parts of the British Empire that are essentially ruins. If you go to some of the old factories in the north, which used to be the textile mills that made Britain wealthy, many of those places are ruins, hollowed out former industrial cores, now jobless and decaying. I mean, in many ways, the genius of Browning is that he understood history. He understood the cycles of history, and he understood that history could happen far faster than we realized. And so I find this poem particularly moving today, partly because of how much has happened since this poem was written, how much folly, noise, and sin, as Browning put it. And of course, if we're American, because I'm American, if we're American reading this in 2026, doesn't it also feel like we live in an empire on the verge of collapse? I mean, doesn't it also feel like, I feel this all the time, that sometimes the civilization that I live in is on its way to ruin, much like this? But for Browning, that's nothing to be pessimistic about, because what does he say? He says, yes, the king, his chariots, his men, all that gold, it might go away. But what's left is not just beautiful, but maybe even more meaningful. What's left after the empire falls is love, is the image of a man and a woman meeting in the ruins, is that beautiful line, "O heart, O blood that freezes, blood that burns." In other words, the collapse of an empire does not take away the feelings of the human heart. Whether the empire rises or falls, wherever in the cycle of history we happen to be, the heart is still the heart. Blood freezes and burns. People meet in ruins for clandestine, secret rendezvous. And I think that's beautiful. And that's such a perfect image. And even though the Victorian era seems very long ago, I think it is still an image for our time. A reminder that there is something eternal within us that survives the cycles of history, that survives the ups and downs of history. And so, whenever I feel particularly down about the world, about time, about where we are historically, about where things are going, whenever I listen to the news too much or read the news too much, I like to return to poems like this one, which remind us of certain eternal feelings. Feelings like love, feelings associated with the heart. And they help remind us, and this is why literature in general and poems in particular are so important for a society. They help remind us of the things that matter, and they help us see things in a different way. Browning was a wise man because he could see things from a historical scope and historical distance. And when we look at other poems by Browning in the future, we'll see more examples of this. But for now, let's just revel in the beauty of this poem and kind of the wonder of this poem, the wonder of these musical lines, this rise and fall, this lulling, somnolent feeling, this reminder of the eternity of things beyond the ups and downs of history. All right, so we'll wrap up there for today. Thank you everyone for listening. As always, if you enjoyed what you heard, please like, subscribe, share the podcast, share the YouTube channel, and I will see you all next time.